Another dire warning has emerged over the threat of nuclear war following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Speaking in Geneva, the UN human rights chief warned that all of humanity is at risk over the increasing nuclear threat. Now, it's not all bad. There are discussions about peace talks resuming, and hopefully that is the case. If Russia stops at the river in Ukraine, splitting the country, that's probably a good thing at this point, although the invasion itself is increasingly getting worse. We can only hope that it resolves itself with peace talks and maybe where Russia currently is. But there is reason to believe that Russia seeks to escalate the conflict, refusing to back down. Now, we can look at Russia and see they're engaging in a hot war, but the West is absolutely engaging in warfare as well. It's just not kinetic. There are sanctions. There's influence, propaganda, manipulation, and Russia is not going to back down. In fact, backing them into a corner may only make things worse. We're now getting reports that Russia has deployed warplanes that violated the airspace of Sweden, and a helicopter has violated the airspace of Japan. People need to realize that Russia is massive, has around 150 million citizens. And for the people who live in the United States who think it's some faraway land, I'll remind you that Russia is only about 50 miles away from the United States. Now, of course, some people may say, oh, come on, but Alaska? Yeah, Alaska. I mean, there are American citizens who live there. What would happen if Russia actually made a move against Alaska? More importantly, when we're looking at the Aleutian Islands, the U.S. may actually be closer than that. Russia is within the same distance to Japan. It also borders NATO countries, and Kaliningrad in the Baltic Sea is very close to Swedish territory. Now, this could all be bluster. It could all be saber rattling. But I worry that this will not just end where it is. We have that map from Belarus showing Russia may actually move into Moldova, already occupying Transnistria, and maybe use it as a staging ground to take Kiev. Speaking with a friend of mine from Ukraine, I was told that Vladimir Putin will not stop at the river. It's not enough. Putin will not be satisfied with just controlling the east of Ukraine. He will need to take it all. However, of course, my friend firmly believes in the resilience of the Ukrainian people to resist. And it is true, Russia will struggle to maintain control of Ukraine amid resistance fighting and insurgency. This could escalate, and hopefully it doesn't. But there are more reports now that foreign fighters are joining the fray. And technically, I think it's fair to say that NATO is already engaging in this conflict enough to trigger an escalation from Putin. Perhaps that's why we're seeing him invade the airspace of Japan and Sweden. The U.S. is sending weapons and fighter jets, and there's some speculation that there may be NATO individuals providing more material assistance. My question here is, what constitutes NATO involvement? If Western nations are supplying weapons to Ukrainians and foreign fighters joining the fray, how is that not NATO assisting in the war effort? Of course they are. So where's the red line for Putin? Is he going to say, you can't set foot with NATO troops? Perhaps. But there's more than enough Ukrainians to take up arms granted to them by the West. So is it just semantics, I suppose? Is the red line really that someone from Poland with a NATO badge enters Ukraine? I don't understand why people think that policy, law, and conventions are matter when we're talking about war. There are war crimes. There's the Hague Conventions, the Geneva Conventions. Certain weapons are not allowed. What about Havana Syndrome? Speculation about energy weapons. These things aren't covered in these conventions, but why would Russia back into a corner just to be like, okay, we're going to abide by these rules? No, I don't think so. I think we could be looking at a threat of nuclear war, and the UN certainly thinks that the risk is real. EmmanuelMacron of France said that after speaking with Putin, he believes Putin's delusional, and won't stop until he takes all of Ukraine. Let's read the latest updates on what's happening in the war and the potential escalation. And I will stress there are potential peace talks that could be coming. I don't want to make it seem like the world is ending, but I hope people pay attention to what's happening because things could be getting bad. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member if you want to help support the work I do, if you like these videos, if you like this show. If you like the work our journalists are doing, and you also want to get access to exclusive podcasts from Timcast IRL available only to members, become a member at timcast.com to ensure we can continue in the face of censorship and manipulation. But don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read the first story from Daily Mail. UN warns all of humanity is at risk from heightened nuclear threat levels amid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And before I read the direct statements, this could just be more propaganda, a rallying cry, telling people of the West, we need to stop Russia because he's evil and could destroy the world. Russia has also issued similar threats. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that a third world war will be devastating and nuclear. Russia has the most nukes. Nukes aren't all just ICBMs or warheads. It could be tactical nukes. It could be dirty bombs. Who knows? But this could be saber rattling. Why? Well, Russia wants to scare the West. The West might use that to rally people to push back against Russia. The UN human rights chief slammed Russia's attack on Ukraine on Thursday and cautioned that heightened nuclear threat levels showed all of humanity was at risk from Putin's invasion. Speaking before the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, Michelle Bachelet warned that Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine launched a week ago is generating massive impact on the human rights of millions of people across Ukraine. Elevated threat levels for nuclear weapons underline the gravity of the risks to all of humanity, she added. Her comments during an urgent council debate on the Ukraine conflict came after Russian President Vladimir Putin on Sunday ordered Russia's nuclear forces be put on high alert. It's clear that World War III can only be nuclear, Lavrov said in an online interview with Russian and foreign media. I would like to point out that it's in the heads of Western politicians that the idea of a nuclear war is spinning constantly and not in the heads of Russians. Could it be that the narrative about nuclear war is just appearing in Western media so that we fear Russia, we take action against Russia, and you are convinced that intervention is the right move? I'm not a fan of propaganda, but I do believe that a desperate Russia could use some limited nuclear weapons, be it nuclear artillery, or maybe it's naive. Nuclear weapons are what's on our mind because it's what we know. But what about the weapons we don't know? If the US came out and said Russia had some kind of special weapon, people wouldn't understand or fear it. But knowing the devastating impacts of nuclear weapons, Western forces, NATO, and the US can come out and consistently highlight this, seeding stories that even I would take the bait on to make sure you're scared and desperate to end the conflict before it escalates to this level. I don't know if that's true, because conversely, I can say, if we are pressed to intervene and invade Ukraine in support of Ukraine, I should say invade to attack Russia, I mean, that would just precipitate nuclear war. So the threat of nuclear war could actually prevent us from stopping Russia. I don't know for sure. Fog of war and manipulation. You'll need to decide where you think this goes. Now we have this story from Reuters from today. U.S. warns Moscow and Minsk against deploying nuclear arms in Belarus. There is a nuclear threat level increase. Belarus is allowing Russia to stage nuclear weapons in its country. The U.S. is not happy with it. They warned Russia and Belarus at a UN arms control meeting on Thursday not to deploy nuclear arms in Moscow's neighboring ally following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. has canceled a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile test in an effort to de-escalate nuclear tensions. I think it's a sign of good faith. I don't think it'll mean that much, but certainly it shows the U.S. is willing to do something, even if it is symbolic. And then calling on Moscow and Minsk to not deploy nuclear arms in Belarus, I think it's the right move. As much as I don't like the Biden administration or the bureaucratic state, I do believe in many ways, not always, the U.S. and NATO are on the right side of this. Ukraine very much favors the West. Russia couldn't compete. That's Russia's fault. Invading is wrong. I do not believe that Putin cares for the collateral damage that he is causing. The U.S. is continuing to wage a propaganda war, and the Ukrainians are fighting on their own behalf for themselves. That, to me, is the right side, not Russia's invasion, because he's upset about how gas deals are going. And thus, we end up with this story from UPI.com. Russian warplanes violate Sweden's airspace. Now, this right here, outright. Could it be we are being lied to? And we don't know why Russia would invade Swedish airspace? Maybe. I think it's more likely that Russia is pressuring other countries and effectively threatening them. Russian warplanes, jets, fighters, had violated Swedish airspace, prompting the Swedish Air Force to respond. And we also know Japan is saying a Russian helicopter violated their airspace. This is escalation on the part of Russia. UPI reports 4 Russian warplanes violated Swedish airspace on Wednesday, the Scandinavian country's armed forces said, prompting it to deploy its own forces amid heightened tensions between Europe and Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. Sweden's Air Force dispatched JAS-39 Gripen aircraft in response to 2 Russian Su-27s and 2 Su-24s briefly entering its airspace east of Gotland, probably pronouncing it wrong, in the Baltic Sea. The aircraft documented and photographed the incursion, the Swedish Armed Forces said. Now, do you trust Sweden? There's the issue. They've reported it. I don't see videos. Quote, this demonstrates that our readiness is good, Air Force Commander Carl Johan Edstrom said in a statement. We were on site to secure the territorial integrity and Sweden's borders. We have complete control of the situation. The incursion occurred a day after Japan said a Russian helicopter entered its airspace hours earlier. Tensions between democratic nations and Russia have been climbing following the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine last week. In response, 38 nations have imposed flight bans on Russian planes, and Moscow has been repeatedly hit with sanctions. Among those countries to take a stance against Russia was Sweden, whose Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson announced earlier this week that she would be sending Ukraine 5,000 anti-tank weapons along with protective gear. My question there is, how is this not the West entering the war? Is it because a Swedish soldier isn't the one carrying the gear or deploying the anti-tank weapons? That seems like nitpicking at this point. Sweden has not done anything like this since the Soviet Union attacked Finland in 1939. She said in a speech on Tuesday. It also comes after Russia threatened Sweden and Finland of military and political consequences if they join NATO. Now, of course, we have this story as well from UPI. Japan says Russian helicopter violated airspace, scrambles fighter jet. Also from March 2nd. The helicopter crossed into Japanese airspace over waters off of the northern island of Hokkaido. At 10:43 a.m., the defense ministry said in a brief statement. Japan issued warnings and sent an air self-defense force fighter to respond to the incursion, the ministry said. Japan's military will continue to take all possible measures 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to protect Japan's territory and the peaceful lives of its people. Tokyo issued a protest with the Russian government through a diplomatic channel. Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno said at a press conference on Wednesday. Matsuno called the incident extremely regrettable and said Japan would continue to monitor the situation. The incursion came as countries around the world are on alert over Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. This context we do understand. I want to make sure you understand the geographical consequences of what we're seeing and understand this conflict for those that are watching. For those that are just listening, allow me to explain. North of Poland and southwest of Lithuania is a Russian oblast known as Kaliningrad. It is a heavily militarized area of Russia that sits on the Baltic Sea. Gotland is an island just off of Sweden in the middle of the Baltic Sea. This is where the Russian warplanes briefly entered Swedish airspace. It is said that they came from Kaliningrad, grazed the island, and entered the airspace before leaving after Sweden scrambled its fighters. This has been a fear we've already heard, we've been having some time about Kaliningrad used as a staging ground to escalate the war in Europe. I warned, my personal opinion, not some foreign policy expert, just someone who reads the news and reports on it. I warned that Russia could stage from Kaliningrad first, or Lithuania and Poland could be threatened by the heavily militarized Kaliningrad and try and cut them off first. It seems that the first move has been made by Russia by entering Swedish airspace. Hopefully that's all it is. But this could be Russia basically trying to chest bump or saber rattle at Sweden because they're telling Sweden and Finland not to join NATO. Sweden and Finland seem poised to do just that. So, of course, from Kaliningrad, we're seeing some action. Now, if we zoom out here on Google Maps, I want you to see just how absolutely massive Russia is. For people, I think most people know, but you really need to see it is a very, very large country. Now, keep in mind This is the projection used by Google Maps makes Russia seem substantially larger than it is, but Russia is large. In fact, I think Russia has more landmass than Pluto. I don't know how much that really matters because what's Pluto relative to? But I do want to point out a few things. If you take a look at Alaska, which is a very large landmass, of course, it's a United States. It's a state of the United States of America. From Nome or Wales, Alaska, Russia's only about 50 miles away. Now, it's not like that these territories are heavily populated to the extent where they're prime targets for war, but there very much could be conflict between the US and Russia. And what if Russia were to say, we'll make an attack on Anchorage? Alaska used to be Russia's. How can the US defend Alaska effectively? Not to mention you have the Aleutian Islands, which stretch out very far and are probably much harder to defend. But showing Japan, I think people need to really, really understand this. The distance between Sapporo or Hokkaido and Japan and Russia, they're very, very close. It's the Sea of Japan. And you can see, I wonder if we have 50 kilometers. It looks like we're talking about a gap of maybe 100 to 150 kilometers from Russia to Japan. In fact, if you look at this island here, Yuzhno Sakhalinsk, Russia, is probably only, 20 miles. Oh, I'm sorry, not kilometers. It might have been 100 miles. Only 20 miles or so from Japan. Russia and Japan are neighbors. Russia and China are neighbors. Russia and North Korea are neighbors. Russia and Finland are neighbors. Finland and North Korea are separated by only one country, a very massive Russia. That means Russia is able to stage war on multiple fronts. However, do they have the economy to do so? I'm not entirely convinced. We can see here the city of Vladivostok, right on the Sea of Japan. It's neighboring North Korea. In the Sea of Japan, it could reach South Korea. It could reach Japan. It can reach a lot of different countries. And you know what's scary? North Korea, South Korea, Japan are staring down China as well as Russia. If this becomes a world war in which China backs Russia, well, now we're talking about the dragon bear, as it were, controlling a massive portion of the world, East Asia, and being able to shut down and crush our Southeast Asian allies. Taiwan will not be able to hold out. Already, we're hearing that in Taiwan, there was a major power outage due to negligence. But if this was a cyber attack, how would we really know? That's the scary thing. Now, EmmanuelMacron believes that Putin is delusional and won't stop. I don't know what to believe. I know that Russia invaded, so I'm not giving them the benefit of the doubt. From the Daily Mail. Delusional Putin is intent on seizing the whole of Ukraine to achieve denazification, with the worst violence yet to come, warns Macron after a phone call with Russian leader. Far be it from me to give the benefit of the doubt to people like Emmanuel Macron. I don't trust these people. I don't trust Joe Biden. But I tell you this. I trust Vladimir Putin a whole lot less. Now, Putin, of course, has made good points because he's savvy. Donald Trump called him a genius and savvy, and he was smeared for it. But the reality is Putin is a very intelligent man who has a plan. He's come out and criticized the United States and the West, saying, oh, look, they've invaded Iraq. And they said, oops, bad intelligence. They destroyed a whole country. Vladimir Putin, he's right. He absolutely can criticize the United States. The U.S. has no moral ground to stand on when Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine. The fact is, however, the U.S. was wrong to invade Iraq. They were wrong to invade Afghanistan. And Vladimir Putin is wrong to invade Ukraine. Period. Those of us, I suppose, of moral and principle do have the moral ground to criticize those who invade other countries. That being said, Russia's arguments with the West and the U.S., he's got points. There's the Budapest Agreement, the memorandum. The U.S. is arguably using influence in violation of it to a certain degree, but I think that's only a technicality. There are arguments that the U.S.'s influence campaigns and support of regime change are violating this kind of like, hey, we're going to leave Ukraine alone. But if you look at the memorandum, it's like, well, we're not using aggression, we're using influence, which, again, in my personal opinion, I think it's much better than war to basically just try and like invest in, fund, and convince. What more can you do? Now, regime change is underhanded, and that could be a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. But it is Russia who's directly violated the Budapest Memorandum by invading. Now, apparently, we're obligated in the West to defend Ukraine. And Zelensky brought this up, but he also pointed out there's no true defensive pact. The issue was if nuclear weapons were to be used against Ukraine, then the West would defend Ukraine, and there's no nuclear weapons being used here. So I can certainly say this. While the U.S. is of limited moral ground to stand on, Russia's in the wrong here. Russia, you want to criticize the U.S. over Iraq and Afghanistan? Yo, we got a whole plethora of anti-war activists and personalities in this country who agree with you and are quite pissed off over what the United States has done and is doing. Now, it doesn't mean a whole lot because, again, my taxes help pay for that machine, and I think it's gross. It's one of the reasons why I decided to vote for Donald Trump in 2020, because he was trying to pull that back. You want to hear something really funny? The criticism they throw at Donald Trump. Far from a perfect man with a lot of character defects, to put it mildly, Donald Trump kept the peace to a certain degree. No new wars. There's a post that says, I can't remember who it's from. I tweeted about it. They said something like, Donald Trump was appeasing Putin and backing away from NATO, and Putin wanted all of this. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, Vladimir Putin didn't invade Ukraine. So what you're saying is Trump made some concessions that prevented war? Why would I be mad about that? You can see what the establishment wants. These people want war. They're mad that Trump was de-escalating things and focusing inward on the United States. They're mad that he wanted to pull out of Syria. They're mad he wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. And thus, he had to be stopped. And now they want to, it's infuriating that they try to spin Donald Trump keeping us out of war as a negative. Quite amazing indeed. In a phone call initiated by Putin today, the Russian leader reiterated his determination to neutralize Ukraine, whether diplomatically or by force, a senior aide to Macron said. The expectation of the president is that the worst is yet to come, given what President Putin told him. There was nothing in what Putin told us that should reassure us. He showed great determination to continue the operation, the aide continued, before adding that Putin wanted to seize control of the whole of Ukraine. He will, in his own words, carry out his operation to denazify Ukraine to the end. Now, there's some truth here. The Azov Battalion, not good people, in my opinion. There's a video that went viral that Twitter even shut down, showing someone from the Ukraine National Guard actually posted it, showing a man dipping bullets, I believe they were 7.62 by 39 Kalashnikov rounds, in pig's fat, making a statement about Muslims. I don't see what that has to do with the current conflict. There are certainly some despicable people there. Now, I believe Vladimir Putin is using that as an excuse, to be completely honest, but I do believe there is some legitimate concern over Chechnya, Russia, Muslims in Russia, though I think it's certainly just an excuse to justify Russia's bigger concerns over their natural resources and their ability to sell natural gas and fuels into Europe. Macron, in return, told Putin he was making a major mistake by invading a sovereign nation, that he was deluding himself about the government in Kiev, and the war would cost Russia dearly over the long term, and I think that's correct. The French president also urged Putin to avoid civilian casualties and allow for humanitarian access. Now, this is some good news. We are hearing Russia has agreed to open humanitarian corridors for fleeing civilians, Ukraine official. It's good in only a certain respect. It's bad that it has to happen, but at least civilians may be safe as they escape the country. They shouldn't have to escape the country. It's sick what's happening. I feel bad for these people, man. I got friends. I've mentioned it. I try to keep the details a little bit vague and obscure them. I want to make sure, let me just put it this way. I know people in Ukraine. I talk to them regularly. I keep much of the details a bit obscured for their safety and security and protection. I know journalists who are on the ground and I know journalists on the ground in Ukraine. I wish them nothing but safety and security as they cover this conflict. I have personally covered conflict in Ukraine at the start of the Euromaidan protests, which led into regime change. I was there. I saw the statue torn down of Lenin, fragments being ripped off. People stole his hand or something. They were trying to sell this stuff. I was there. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so, this conflict there matters to me. I know people there. I have a friend. I want to keep the details vague, so I'll just say that I'm regularly in communication with people about what's going on, and I want it to be over. I want Russia ultimately to just back off, but it's not going to happen. It would be naive to think it just ends. I just don't see it happening. From the week, 16,000 foreigners have volunteered to fight for Ukraine during Russian invasion, Zelensky says. I want to be sure you understand there's two points to be made here. That it may be that foreign volunteers are coming to Ukraine and joining in the fighting, and we've seen photos of people claiming that's the case. The second is Volodymyr Zelensky, the president, is just saying it. Show me some proof. Fog of war, man. I don't know what's true. Neither do you. Nobody does. We just want to hope for the best. I can tell you a few things are true. There are bombings. There are shellings. There are civilians losing their lives. There are, I'm getting reports from my sources of civilian targets being hit. Universities, malls, things like that. A lot of it we don't hear in the media, but on the ground, people are sharing this information. That's why it's so important that we have reporters who can get this information out. In a video shared on Telegram, the president referenced the International Legion of 16,000 foreign volunteers he's asked to join the defenses of Ukraine, Europe, and the world, per the Post. Earlier this week, Ukraine temporarily lifted certain visa requirements so foreign volunteers could partake in the push to hold back the Russians. Now, here's some concern. Imagine Nawaz brought this up on Timcast IRL the other day. Some of the people that are coming and joining the fighting are actual far-right, actual neo-Nazis, whatever far-right means, but ultra-traditionalists, authoritarians, fascists, and they're coming to join the likes of the Azov Battalion. After Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba initially called for foreign volunteers last week, countries like Latvia have voted unanimously to allow their citizens to fight for Ukraine. How is this not NATO invading? It makes no sense. Does it require a NATO commander to say, we're going to fight? What if the NATO commander says, any citizen of a NATO nation is allowed to go and fight, but I didn't tell them to? You think Russia's going to look at this and be like, NATO's not involved? Or do you think they see this? Latvia. I mean, this is amazing. Outright voting to allow their citizens to fight for Ukraine? They may as well have ordered it. It's such ridiculous posturing. Well, we didn't declare war. Don't look at us. It's just our citizens. It's remarkable. Let's go back 100 years. I want you to imagine thousands of people marching to the border of a country, waving their flag. And then what would the country, the country where they're marching to, what would they say? Would they say, oh, no, it's not an invasion. You know, we're not being attacked. It's just a bunch of the civilians from our neighboring country waving their flag as they enter the country. What constitutes NATO involvement? Do these civilians need to be carrying weapons from NATO? The craziest thing about all of this is that it kind of exposes how it's not nation versus nation. It's political elite versus political elite. And of course we knew that. But if the civilians can be involved and it doesn't count as declaring war or fighting, I'm sorry, then it makes no sense to say that Latvia is involved or the United States has an army. The United States is not its people in this case. Russia is not its people in this case. Ultimately, it's just absurd and it makes very little sense. I think the expansion is here. I think the escalation is here. And I think it very well could get serious, and I hope it doesn't. But Sergei Lavrov has repeated his warnings that this could become nuclear and it could become World War III. In fact, he said World War III can only be nuclear in his latest TV rant. He said Russia will not allow any provocations to throw us off course. This will be interesting. Russia has invaded. Has anyone done anything about it? To an extent, yes. The West is engaged in influence operations and sanctions. So war is here. And if that's the case, what do we really fear? Do we fear collateral damage? It's going to happen. I've been hearing reports on and off of potential cyber attacks that may be occurring, but we don't know for sure. If we take a look at what's happening in Taiwan, let me see if I can find this one. Mass blackouts affecting 5 million homes hit parts of Taiwan as authorities blame negligence at a power plant incident as Mike Pompeo arrived in to warn the island must not suffer Ukraine's fate. Interesting, really. A power outage? A blackout affecting 5.5 million households? 5.5 million homes. Sorry, I said people. That I find truly fascinating. Could it be negligence? Yes, of course. Could it be cyber war? I believe so. Slogging up someone's economy is a powerful tool in a war. If Russia knows that we're going to be entering, and they can hurt our economy, which limits our ability to produce weapons, they'll do it. And that means something as simple as shutting down our internet with a distributed denial of service attack or something to that effect. But we don't know, and we won't know. As members of the public, the fog of war is real. and it's hard to know exactly what is or isn't an attack. Power plants blowing up, just an accident. Power going out, just an accident. Explosion, did you hear it? I don't know. That was just a fireworks factory or something. Even if artillery is launched and it slams into a school, someone can say a propane tank exploded if they don't want escalation. Or a propane tank could explode and they could then just go on and be like, we got shelled. It's really hard to know for sure unless you witness it. These are truly dark times. I want to make sure that we mention peace talks are a real possibility. Now, Macron may come out and just say, he's delusional and all that stuff. But opening up these humanitarian corridors, good news, and there's a potential for peace talks. In this tweet from Richard Engel of NBC, he tweets, in a small press conference with a group of reporters in Kiev, President Zelensky said he needs to speak to Putin, saying there is of room for compromise and discussion, but not about Ukraine's survival as an independent nation. Many people have pointed to this tweet and said, he's losing. Ukraine is falling. Vladimir Putin is winning. Putin doesn't need to do much to the Western nations that are joining in because he's winning. Seeing Zelensky in what appears to be a cramped space, seeing him say he needs to speak with Putin, it's all indicative of Ukraine losing. I like Zelensky. I think he's a good dude. I respect the efforts he's... Alexa, quiet. Alexa, stop. I like Zelensky. I respect him. And I wish for him the best. And I wish the best for Ukraine. But these are dark times. And reality is, it's important. We got to talk about what's really going on and not just try and mask it or hide it. And the reality is that Ukraine is losing this one. I hate to say it, but the sooner Ukraine loses this, potentially the better. If Russia secures their position and Ukraine just gives in, maybe not give in, but loses, then we'll see a de-escalation. It'll become a tense standoff and insurgency, but I think that's all bad. I think it's all bad. Russia's not going to back down. So think about it logically. What is the best outcome at this point? The best outcome at this point would be Russia backing off and leaving. It's not going to happen. The best alternative then would be Russia gets what they want and they stop. The fear is, what if they don't? And why would they? So I don't know. That's the worrying thing here. But I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. That'll be at 8 p.m. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.